It's a power-packed panel to discuss the power dynamics in West Asia. And when we talk about West Asia, we talk about not just what's happening in the Middle East, but we also expand it to talk about Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, the region that is extremely important for India for many reasons, whether it is strategic, whether it's our interest related to energy, all that and much more. So that's exactly what we're going to focus on. We have Ambassador Tirumurthy, who's the former permanent representative of India to the United Nations, Ambassador Bisaria, who's former High Commissioner of India to Pakistan, Kabir Taneja, Deputy Director and Fellow Strategic Studies Program at the ORF. We have Dr. Awad, who is senior journalist and West Asia strategist, and Ambassador Tim Rober joining us live from Washington, D.C. He's Executive Director, APCO, and former U.S. Ambassador to India. As I said, it's a power-packed panel to discuss the power dynamics in the region. Let's get started, and gentlemen, we'll try and cover as much ground as possible because there's a lot of issues to try and pack in 30 minutes. The clock is already ticking. So let me start, Ambassador Tirumurthy, with you. And we're going to try and take up each of these geographies as much as possible through the lens of India. Why it matters to India, India's interests, how they can be protected, and how we can build on that momentum going forward. But let's start first with the conflict in the region. When you talk about Israel and Iranian proxies, how do you read that? And then we come back and talk in terms of some of the other regions in West Asia.
I think Israel has reasserted its military domination in the region, which it always had. If you come to Gaza, there is no doubt that Hamas has been considerably degraded, but this has come at a very high cost. And some would say it's an unacceptably high cost. We have had more than 43,000 Palestinians who have been killed, most of them women and children. And international law has been violated. And this has happened right through the conflict. The brutal attack of Hamas on Israel, the more than 250 hostages which they have taken into Gaza, and then the pulverization of Gaza to dust. And I think more importantly, the dehumanization of the Palestinians. I think all these have happened, and the ceasefire is nowhere in sight, and Israel has clearly ruled out a ceasefire. And when it comes to Lebanon, you've had the degradation of Hezbollah as well. And they are still fighting it out. It's not an easy fight for either of the two sides. But weakening of the Hezbollah, they not only get weakened militarily, but they also get weakened politically. Because as you know, there has been a political logjam in Lebanon. It's a sovereign state. And Hezbollah is playing a part there on the political side. So therefore, they get weakened politically, which probably is not a bad thing for the Lebanese themselves. Maybe they can break the political paralysis. So therefore, the so-called axis of resistance are definitely getting weakened, which is a good thing for Israelis. When it comes to Iran, you know very well that Israel and the West have put out this narrative that the biggest problem in the Middle East is Iran, and it is not the Palestinian issue. And that is partly the reason why we have had this, the Abraham Accords, where they have normalized, the Gulf has normalized with Israel, but without any reference to the Palestinian issue itself.
Right.
So I think that is where this Gaza war has brought the Palestinian issue back into the reckoning. And this tit for tat between Israel and Iran, which has gone on. Now, that is something which, in my opinion, for the first time ever, when Iranians are able to tell the world that they can actually reach Israel and pierce the Iron Dome,
yes,
I think the rules of engagement have been irrevocably reset.
Okay.
And that is not necessarily in favor of Israel. So if all this put together, is Israel more secure now than before? I'm not so sure. Because history tells us that whenever Israel goes into Gaza or when they go into Lebanon, they get caught in a quagmire and they have to finally extricate themselves. which should automatically, the radicals in the region then get strengthened, and then the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza becomes more intense, and this cycle goes on.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm interjecting there, sir, because that's a very important point that you made in terms of long-term outcomes of the war for Israel and by extension, I mean the world as well. But I come back to what I started this discussion with, which is that how do we view this entire region through the lens of New Delhi? And I think when we talk about West Asia, I think Pakistan is probably equally important for us. And Ambassador Bisaria, I want to ask you more so, given the political instability that Pakistan is witnessing and a fair amount of flux that it's going through, how does that impact the region, the stability for New Delhi? And then we also talk in terms of the bilateral relationship, but first address the instability that we are seeing right now in Pakistan, which many feel is only set to increase given the fact that the civilian government is on a very weak footing there.
Yes, so what Pakistan is going through is a sort of polycrisis for the last at least 3 years. It has a security crisis, it has an economic crisis, and it also faces a political crisis. And all these add up, reinforce each other, and create a fair deal of instability and incoherence in policy. But you asked about how India is viewing it and how it should. I would make the broader point that in this conference you've heard for a couple of days, India's central mission is to grow and to be that $10 trillion economy, to be that $35 trillion economy by 2047. And what we need, therefore, is a stable periphery and also stability in the world. So we have a vested interest in having a stable region around us, and in the conflicts in West Asia and in Ukraine. If we can play a role, we'd like to play a role for peace in order to mitigate that risk to our growth trajectory. Now, Pakistan itself, when we look at the region, we see Pakistan and China as two abnormal countries with whom we've had adversarial relationships. But the instinct to stabilize those relationships is strong, and we are talking in a month when we are doing both of them. So,
Exactly,
the Prime
yes.
Minister will be having a meeting with his Chinese counterpart, and the External Affairs Minister was in Pakistan. And it was a small step, but a message that we are willing to consider stabilizing this relationship. The deal breaker always is terrorism. So
Yeah.
if there is terrorism in Jammu and Kashmir, that breaks the deal. But our instinct is to go and engage and move forward in this relationship.
Then there's been a lot of talk about, I would say, expectation around the India-Pakistan bilateral relationship. Dr. Jaishankar spoke to our editor-in-chief yesterday on the fact that there isn't much right now, given that it was a very specific visit to which he went to Pakistan for. But as someone who understands the dynamics very well, is it just a case of more expectations around than actual movement on ground, or do you think this could pave the way for more possibilities in the future?
It does pave the way because both sides tried some expectation management, because in both countries the narrative runs away with the media on every small development. But the point they wanted to make was, can we make a small step forward, create conditions for that larger rapprochement which we could possibly have, but build that trust. And I think that small step was made. It was no insignificant signal from India that Minister Jaishankar himself went to Pakistan. So I think the attempt is to try and stabilize that relationship, if not normalize it. And it plays into the larger story of India's foreign policy, that we want to stabilize the neighborhood, we want to be the rising tide which helps all the neighbors, and we also want to be an advocate and force for peace in the conflicts in the world, whether it's in Ukraine or in Gaza. If India can play a role, it will. In
fact, on that note, let me bring in Ambassador Romer into this conversation, sir. two important threads that I want to ask you. One on the fact that the role that New Delhi can play on a day when Prime Minister is in Kazan, he is meeting President of Russia, and President Putin has said in the past that if at all anybody that he trusts for the Ukraine conflict to be resolved, Prime Minister Modi is one of them. Also, there are voices that suggest that if at all West Asia conflict can be potentially resolved, New Delhi must play a larger role. In those contexts, I must ask you, sir, how do you see India's role and also the responsibility it has in the region?
Well, that's a very good question. And first of all, let me just tell you, I'm delighted to be back at the World Summit and with a very, very distinguished panel here today. I'm reading a book called On Grand Strategy by John Lewis Gaddis, a Yale professor and a grand strategist in foreign policy. And he has an Aesop's tale about the fox who knows many things and the hedgehog who knows one big thing. The one big thing for strategy in the Middle East that the United States has been advocating now for several years is a brand new architecture of regional security in that area. That's based upon, of course, the United States being one of the anchors of that partnership, but also so that we can spend more time in the Indo-Pacific. So we spend more time growing our economy, so we can spend more time with our European allies, managing the China relationship, battling terrorism. And so this new strategy in the Middle East is dependent upon the Abraham Accords and reaching out to other Arab states for peace and prosperity. It is based upon a normalization of trade and relations with Saudi. And it's based upon a strong Israel. Now, India can play a very, very important role in putting together this new architecture for a regional cooperation and security. India has 9 million people in the diaspora up in the Middle East. They have a strategic interest there. They're engaged more and more in maritime security. Their economy, as one of the panelists, the ambassador, was just talking about how India is more and more engaged in the world economy and therefore more involved in trying to make sure there's peace and stability in the world and oil prices don't spike. We're involved now more in the corridor leading up to the Middle East corridor that India could greatly profit and benefit from. And Mr. Modi has reached out to the United Arab Immigrants with more and more trade where they can invest in India and their economy. So India is right in the middle of many, many important things in the Middle East. So it's in their strategic interests to do more than diplomacy. Now, their superpower right now is diplomacy because they can open so many doors in the Middle East. They can talk to Iran. They can talk to Israel. They can talk to the Palestinians. They have a good relationship with many, many different people in that region. And they seem to be looking at the resolution of the Middle East in many of the same ways that the United States is. There needs to be a secure ceasefire. There needs to be an exchange, release of the hostages.
Yes.
There needs to be a secure settlement, a peacekeeping group coming into the area, probably Arab-led. There needs to be a reconstruction effort at some point in that area, probably led by Europe, but also the U.S. and India could play a very important role in the rebuilding of Gaza. And then finally, I just say that there needs to be a moderate, prosperous economy in Gaza, long-term,
yes,
that is politically stable and politically moderate. Those are the goals that the United States and India can work on together.
Absolutely.
To bring a new architecture and regional security arrangement to an area where China is growing quicker and faster.
Absolutely, Ambassador Romer. I'm going to come back to you with the questions or concerns that many have in terms of American leadership. Is that going through a phase of vacuum right now due to its internal political concerns that are taking over? I'll come to that in a bit, but the questions and rather the important insights that Ambassador Roma has thrown up in terms of what all can India do, the leverage it has, the fact that in a multipolar world, India has relationships across partners in this region. Kabir, how big a strength is that, and how can New Delhi really leverage on those?
Thank you so much. I think this, India has an impeccable sort of outreach in the region, right? And I know there are a lot of views on when you're using the term mediation on trying to solve or resolve issues in West Asia, but it doesn't have to be we don't have to use the word mediation. You can just incubate some conversations, you can exchange messages, you can try to do an outreach on behalf of one another to just send across messages on what kind of thinking is taking place, especially where there are vacuums, right? One of the most difficult things to do, especially in a conflict like we are seeing in West Asia, is to fill vacuums. Sometimes, states take longer to fill a vacuum. Sometimes the official sort of channels take longer, and non-state entities are faster and more nimble these days, thanks to social media and so on and so forth, to come and sort of, push through their narratives. So there's this incredible sort of outreach that India has, as mentioned previously, with the Palestinians, with Israel, with the Arab world, and specifically with Iran, that certainly should be on offer. From the Indian side. Again, as I would just like to repeat that it does not mean it's mediation. I think there are whole different components that mediation requires, but incubating that conversation, that's certainly what India can successfully do.
I think in a situation that's deadlocked, just making any progress, that itself is the right direction for the world to move in. Dr. Awad, come in there in terms of what all can New Delhi do, and what I asked Kabir as well, that the next steps that New Delhi can sort of take in this region to really try and play. Mediation is a strong word, I agree with Kabir on that, but to be able to break the deadlock in any manner possible.
Thank you. I think India, I always advocate that India is the #1 stakeholder in the region in terms of the diaspora security, in terms of the food security, in terms of the oil security. So the natural extension of India into West Asia, apart being Pakistan has been on only after the partition, India was a natural extension to this part of the world. So therefore, the cultural exchange between India and the Arab world goes beyond millenniums. So we have seen the travel of the Arabs into India and to Kerala, and how St. Thomas came to India and spread Christianities and then Islam. We have the very strong and bonds in India. So therefore, India can play a role. But does India, like the rest of the world, have a voice to speak when it is the ball in the American court? It's nothing. Nobody is able to do anything because nobody is stopping the carnage. Is a total genocide happening in Gaza, where not a single word in the world are able to even pass a bottle of water to them. So all this,
okay,
India,
as we don't have an Israeli representation, I will have to come in there to just say that let's try and stick to more facts for the simple reason that we had the Israeli ambassador yesterday on the panel. And in fact, there was a conversation I had with him, and he said that this war can only end when Israel can have long-term peace. And that cannot happen right now, given the fact that it's fighting a 6-front, 7-front war due to the presence of Iranian proxies on several factors and several geographies. So that's what the Israeli version has been. And they've been saying that they've been very clear that there's been no concept of collective punishment. The reason why I'm reiterating that is because if there's no Israeli representation, let it not drift in a manner that we do not represent the other aspect of this discussion as well. It's a nuanced debate, and it's only fair to the audience that they should get the other side. Go ahead, Doctor.
No, I think you are right in your answer, because if it is, that's true. Because for Jews in the world, they have been prosecuted all over the world for a millennium. They only had shelter and lived like us, a Semite. We lived together in the same, under the Islamic rule. They never been prosecuted. When they came from Europe, after the Holocaust came to Palestine, in fact, prior to 1905, there was only 4,500 Jewish in Palestine. So that they came to stay But when the problem is not with the Jew, the problem is with the Zionist movement in 1897, when they decided to create a state in Palestine. It is a land with people, it's not land without people. No, Garima, let me put my point very clear here. You had your voice on this. My point is very clear.
No, I don't have a voice. I'm just asking all of you. Yes.
I'm sorry. My point, I'm just trying to be, I am trying to give you the natural things. When the war started in the Arab world, 1948, it started between Israel and the Arab world, right? Over the years, there was peace deal with Camp David. Then you had Arafat. Then you had the Palestinian. Then you had a bilateral. Now you brought back the issues into a regional war.
Sir, I'll tell you, I am not interrupting you, but all I'm trying to say is, we live in times of 24/7 news. Trust me, the last 1 year, this audience knows exactly the milestones that you're referring to. But we also have the clock ticking right here, and quite literally the clock is ticking on this conflict for the world to find a solution. If we go back to 1948, there is no end to how far back in time we can go. Let me pause you there, because I want to touch upon two important things, and also get an Ambassador Roma who's wanting to come in here as well. Quickly, a question, Ambassador Tirumurthy, which is that as things stand right now, it doesn't look like this conflict is going to end soon, because that's how the positions are right now. In that context, if this war were to continue for some time, how do you see it impacting India and India's interests?
See, I think the most important thing which we need to look at is the day after. And now, for the day after, you have to have a day, and then comes the day after. And what is the day you're looking at? You're looking at a ceasefire. And ceasefire, as you know, has been ruled out by Israel in Gaza as of now. And so therefore there is no ceasefire, and it's going to continue for some time. The day after is the one which will really determine how the countries are going to be impacted. And this involves a political solution. Now, the question is, a military solution is being found for whatever the Israelis think that there is a military solution now. But we need to transition to a political solution. And only then can you have security for Israel, which is they are desperately seeking, and also a certain element of stability in the region. Because after all, we have ambitious plans, and you've just heard what India would like to do. And these ambitious plans can take place only when there is security in the region. And that will not come without a political solution. Whether it is a two-state solution or a one-state solution is a different matter. And there, I'll just take just a few seconds. The point is that the world, including the International Court of Justice, has just spoken for a two-state solution, the 1967 boundary.
Yeah.
But whereas probably what Israel is looking at,
yes,
which they have explicitly mentioned in so many words, is they want the West Bank for themselves because it is part of Judea and Samaria.
Right.
So we have to see how these things pan out for it to be impacted. And India will definitely be impacted if there is no stability in the region.
Indeed, yes. I'm going to come to some of those infrastructure projects that India has, and also some deep economic engagements it wants to build on, including the relationship with Iran. But Ambassador Romer, come in on the fact that two aspects. One is, how do these fantastic military victories translate into long-term political solution for Israel? And the second question that many have been, and experts have been wondering about, which is that the US leadership crisis seems to be on display in the Middle East, given the fact that 1 year into this conflict, it is not in a position to find some sort of a solution, possibly due to the politics that's taking over, the domestic politics that's taking over leadership's time.
Well, great questions. Let me get the second one first. The United States is still working assiduously and diligently and every day and every hour to try to get to a ceasefire, to try to make sure that peace comes to the region. Secretary Blinken landed in the Middle East today for his 11th trip to the Middle East since Hamas attacked Israel a year ago on October 7th. To the point of some of the frustration that I hear on the panel here, we have had Secretary Blinken and Secretary Austin, our defense secretary, send a very stern letter to the Israeli government on October the 14th saying, we will cut off arms, the potential to cut off arms to Israel if more supplies and humanitarian aid is not sent into Gaza. Israel responded immediately, and dozens of trucks were sent in based upon that stern and that very, very, I think, effective demand from our two secretaries. On October 15th, the United States sent Israel the THAAD system, which is the Terminal High Altitude Defense System. Speculation is that Israel got that so that they would not attack Iranian oil sites and spike oil prices, thereby hurting the global economy and obviously India. And so that there is effectually a lot of deal making going on here to try to de-escalate things in the Middle East. Now, what can India do specifically? I don't think they are a mediator at this point. I think they are a convener. Mr. Modi brought Egypt into the BRIC Association back in 2023.
Yes.
What can India do to try to make sure that when they meet with the Iranians, they try to de-escalate things with Iran, and when the Indians sit down and meet with Israel, they can also say, how do we de-escalate?
Yes.
I don't think Israel is in a position right now where they're going to draw back and they're going to agree to a ceasefire. I think Netanyahu is going to do all he can to politically cement in the military gains and wait out for the U.S. election to take place and see who wins between Trump and Harris.
Absolutely. And Ambassador Bisaria, which brings me to the question that as things stand right now, if this war were to continue, it is bound to have some impact, or do you think it's bound to have some impact on the India-Iran relationship, given the fact that you heard Ambassador Romer also very clearly saying that this war isn't ending anytime soon. So how does that impact New Delhi's relationship with a very important player for us, which is Tehran, in the context of the geopolitical headwinds that the region is seeing?
Absolutely. I think each day the war goes on, it is not in India's interests for its diaspora interests, for the reason of oil prices, and for India's geopolitical relationships. We are talking of, as we speak, there is a BRICS summit on where India's Prime Minister is likely to meet the Iranian president. And India is balancing those relationships in West Asia with relationships with both sides. So it does put pressure on India, and the more serious a war situation becomes, the tougher it is. But I think India's positioning will be that if we can play a role in peacemaking, we will. And as we've been talking in this panel, there are multiple levels of peacemaking. It could be just communication, it could be providing a platform, and working on a ceasefire or a peace plan comes much later. So India's interest is in this conflict ending as soon as possible.
All right.
Can I say one final thing?
Sure, Ambassador Romer, quickly, please. Yes.
Yeah, quickly. Not only can India play an important role in convening and possibly in peacemaking, but when I served as U.S. ambassador in New Delhi, we worked closely with India to invest in and try to bring peace to Afghanistan. And India did that. They did rebuilding of the parliament. They did women's empowerment training. They did economic investment and road building in Afghanistan. So when we get to the phase of rebuilding Gaza, India brings very important experience and interests and credibility.
That's a very important point you made. And I wish we could talk more in terms of what happens next, rebuilding of Gaza. Another issue that I wanted to touch upon in detail was IMEC, Kabir. Dr. Awad, I wish we had time for that, but I end with what I started. The clock is ticking quite literally for this conflict as well, for the world to find a solution. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me on this session. We're going to come back and talk more on this maybe at a later time, but right now this is all the time we have. Thank you so much.